Hello and welcome to Property Matters, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And you can find this weekly property show live every Sunday at propertymatterstv.co.uk or by searching Property Matters in either YouTube or Facebook. And if you're watching on our website, then we'd love you to hit that Google review button and give us a review on the website if you would. And whenever and wherever you're watching us, of course, watching the show, then give us your comments in the comments section below. And if you'd like to get in touch, it's hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk, our email address. Property Matters is also available as a podcast, of course, every Monday at 10 a.m. on the 8 biggest podcast platforms, wherever you get yours from. So let's take a look at the week's news with Joe Joshi. Happy New Year, Joe, and how's things?
Yes, Happy New Year, Paul. Happy New Year to everybody, and thank you for all tuning in and listening on our podcast. Amazingly enough, 3 years in the making, Paul. 2023 puts us, into our third year of operation as Property Matters. Can't believe that every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock we come live. That's commitment for you, and it tells you there's always enough news and views in property wherever you go, whenever you're going to be watching and listening.
Just about. It's been a quiet week for news this week, but some interesting points have come up, and let's have a look at some of them for this this Sunday, shall we? So 1 in 5 adults believe, aged 35 to 54, that securing a mortgage to purchase a house is an unattainable goal in their lifetime. The figures come from a new study by comparison platform Forbes Advisor, which also revealed that the average person over the age of 55 thinks individuals should stop being able to use the bank of mum and dad at 22 years of age, 7 years earlier than the current national average. It's interesting to see, Joe, isn't it, that the affordability, we've always talked about it going further and further away like the carrot in front of the donkey, but it seems to be getting even worse. And we have a little graph to start us off there. Look, you can see paying rent at parents' house, so 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 of them in the survey, 25 to 34, and then 24, 35 to 44, 21 still paying rent in parents' house, 45 to 54, and 19 of the survey, 55 plus. So things are changing quite a bit, aren't they, Joe?
Yes, I mean, the idea of staying at home seems to be...
Looks like we have a little bit of a freeze situation. New Year gremlins coming in. Also, hopefully Joe will come back to us any second. But
being live, isn't it? Because we're frozen now.
Yeah, you're frozen for some reason. If you want to just log out and log back in again, I can just go through the graph.
I'm frozen, Paul.
Yes. Do you want to log out and log back in? That's it. Yeah, he'll come back in a second. So buying their own home with a mortgage, 27 people were doing that 18 to 24, and then 28 in 55 plus. So you're back again, Joe.
I'm here. You've frozen me out. They thought they could shut me up, but I'm back.
Yeah, the old broadband playing up again this morning. Yeah. So, we were just talking about the fact that there's still plenty of them buying their own home with a mortgage, but also plenty living at home with parents, and things don't seem to be changing much, apart from the fact that they now think they're not going to be able to afford a mortgage at all.
Yes, I mean, I think affordability. There's a whole bunch of things that are now being accounted for in affordability, Paul. That's the problem. And over the last year, we've had increases in just the utilities alone, and lenders have started to probably take that into consideration, because it's originally, when you filled out a form, there was an estimate of what your electric cost would be, or your gas would be, and your shopping would be, etc., etc. But of course, that's all been thrown out of the water right now, because most of it is much more, especially when you think about the shopping and, of course, the utilities. And now lenders are sort of thinking, well, actually, it's not just about the mortgage, because the mortgage rate's gone up as well. It's also all the other costs that they've got to sort of, and that then brings in the affordability factor. And bringing in the affordability factor means that most people that thought could reach a certain amount of mortgage can no longer do that, which means it puts them out of the sink to try and buy a property. My suggestion, obviously, with that is that we do try and buy your property, but also maybe you might have to move further afield to step on that first run of the property ladder. You may not get it where you are, where you want to be in an ideal situation. You may need to go out to come back in, so to speak. But unless you're on it or in it, as they say, you're not going to win it. So it is a case of making those plans in such a way that you have to maybe move further out. Now that is a challenge for a lot of things. Obviously, work-wise, communication, travel, etc. But considering that a lot of people have now can work partly from home and partly from an office, that should be more sustainable. I think it's a frame of mind in our minds that we don't particularly want to move out of the areas that perhaps we are in and would like to ideally buy within those areas, because you get comfortable. All your facilities are there, your doctors, your nurses, etc., etc. You know where everything is, and you think, well, actually, I quite like it here. All my friends are here. I don't want to move out. But if you want to get on that first run of the property ladder, you may have to consider doing that, especially when affordability has to be taken into account. Now, interestingly enough, there was an article recently that since the mini budget, £300 million worth of mortgages were actually withdrawn from people that were buying primarily because of this affordability. And the affordability threw the idea out. And so all those people that thought they were going to go and buy a property were not able to buy a property since that, because the interest rates started going up. So it is, as you say, the carrot gets further away from the donkey, so to speak. But in some cases, in this situation, you'll have to maybe move locations, move areas in order to get on the run of the property ladder.
Yeah, if you look at the graph on the screen there, or for the benefit of those listening on the podcast, according to the research, the average person over 55 was paying rent to their parents when they were 19. Now millennials are 25 before they're being charged for living at home. So effectively, that's credit from the bank of mum and dad, if you like, I would guess. Of those that were able to buy a house, over 55s typically received their first mortgage at the age of 28, while those currently aged 35, 44, they achieved this when they were 30. 1 in 20 respondents of the survey expressed the belief that future generations will never be able to achieve financial independence, with the average house price now at $296,000 and falling fast. And the average salary is $27,756. Young people are facing an unfavourable ratio in excess of 10 times their annual salary, compared to just 4.7 times the average salary in 1990, when a lot of us, of course, got our houses. So it is a very, very different market now, isn't it, Joe?
Not only is it a different market, the lending process is vastly different to what it was then. I mean, there was times when we had what they call self-certification mortgages, and a lot of people that were either self-employed or were prepared to self-certify were able to borrow a tremendous amount of money. And obviously, 2007, 2008, when the financial crisis started in the US, because of those self-cert mortgages, it actually came running back to everywhere, including the UK. But sooner or later, a level of or some sort of self-cert mortgage will have to come back to light, because these targets, these points, what they're trying to do to try and get mortgages, it's just not going to be highly possible. The key factors in mortgages is that your credit, the credibility has got to be absolutely squeaky clean. And if any lender gets the chance to say, well, you've got a county court judgment, or you missed a payment on your mobile phone, or anything like that, those are things that are really going to go against you. So those that are thinking about it, you need to sort of really seriously think about, tidying up the credit side of it in order to be able to get onto the run of the property ladder, even if it is at a smaller amount.
Yeah, looking at the charts, the average age when people started paying their own household bills, what's interesting about that is that's pretty much static across. It's around about 24, 25, when presumably you think, right, probably your parents have had enough and kicked you out, I would imagine. But there seems to be pretty much that's the stage when it's time to leave home, is about 25 and pay your own bills. But what I find interesting is that those in the different age groups that are supporting other family members. So in others, presumably when they had kids or a partner that they were supporting, the average age that happened for 55 pluses is 34, but now in the 18 to 24s, it's 27. So in that age group, they're starting their family or supporting other people in the family earlier than we did.
Yes, and again, because probably they started having families or having other connections much earlier, without the pressure of having those mortgages, because they was probably still living at parents. And so they found that that was an easy route to perhaps go and start a family. Also, there's a lot of people that will start a family and also separate, and then have to support, and that means that it doesn't allow them to go and actually buy or get involved in a property. The whole parenting family picture is vastly different to the times when obviously we were there, and people were looking to do 3.5, 4 times. I mean, when I used to think to do mortgages, 3.5, 4 times income was a challenge then, but now we're at 6 times, sometimes even 10 times the income, and still not making those numbers work. So house prices will continue to rise, even though at this moment in time they're probably slightly stagnant, because everybody has seen that ultimately the best investment they'll ever make is their home. So for some it's out of reach, some it's within reach, and amazingly enough, the millennials that we speak about are actually probably better earners today than perhaps we were at the time we were earning at the same age. But for some reason, they find it hard to get on. And I think part of that is that, life is a little bit easier. Mum and dad's home is a bit more comfortable. And they can still order the pizza from Just Eat because they want to. And so, those things, there's a lot of mindsets in my mind that are not, formatting. And so therefore they will actually turn around and be hanging around a bit longer than they thought. I always, when I listen to them, I always feel that they're sort of hard done by. Actually, they're not hard done by. I think they just basically got it easy and don't realize that, they have a focus. And the focus is always, well, I'm young enough, I've got another few years, I'll do it then. Our motto was much different, when the 55 or now, the 60-year-olds like me were looking back, thinking that, we had to get on fairly quickly because mum and dad were not in a position to do that. Whereas now there are equities built in people's properties. So mum and dad have equity in their homes, and kids kind of almost have an eye on that, even though they shouldn't, but they do. And they think, okay, well, I'll get that support from mum and dad, because ultimately, if they're going to kick the bucket, I'm probably going to get it anyway. So I might as well push them for a deposit for the loan or whatever. So the Bank of Mum and Dad existed. I mean, Bank of Mum and Dad has only been in situ, as we know it, probably in the last 10 years, more so than before. We've talked about it for the last 3 years on our shows for Mum and Dad, Bank of Mum and Dad, and that's primarily because, that's the taxation and all the other bits that happen allow Mum and Dad to think, well, actually, I'm going to give it to them at the end. They might as well have it now. The problem with that is the focus, the motivation focus of going out and getting it all by yourself kind of slightly gets clouded because they think, I'm going to get it anyway. So I think that's also a big step that makes them sort of think, I'll sit back and wait.
Interesting point they raise at the end of the article when they talk about the financial education, Joe, and the suggestion that there really ought to be more structured financial education in schools and colleges to help people understand, particularly when we got things like this cost of living crisis and affordability and your mortgage repayments and all that sort of thing, the basic cash flow of the family, if you like. And from what I see of maths from my kids, the more they get more advanced maths, the less numbers there are in it, more letters there are in it. I never understand how that all works, but they learn all this maths, which is very precise and specific to certain career paths. But actually, broadly, a lot of people, the maths they learnt at school, they don't use. So is there an argument that says we should have a bit better, more practical financial support and education for our kids in schools?
Unquestionably, I think the basics are very, very important. And I think it's no matter how complex the maths gets and how complex our work life gets the biggest issue is everything is online, everything is available to be doing through a smartphone, etc. But the thing you can't take away is the practicality, the basics. The back to basics is never going to go away. And the basics are that you do need to understand, and schools and education needs to provide those basics throughout, that, it is 1-on-1 is 2 situation, not 1-on-1 is 11. as we say in our culture. But primarily, the main thing here is that they need to learn the everyday costs that are incurred. I just don't think that they take it on board. It's almost taken for granted. Oh yeah, I'll sort that. It's okay. It'll get done. It's not a problem. It's only £50. It's only £30. It's only £20, or whatever the cost might be. Priorities are very different, and until such time as they actually put their hand in their pocket and realize how much is actually being spent, that's the only time that the real math starts to come into play, Paul. And I think that needs to go back to school and back to the basics of education, and give a run, and business people and parents may be actually a good source for that education. In fact, coming from a parent in a school may actually be a little bit more interesting than from a teacher, primarily because it seems to be real that this is the kind of cost. You must almost put your list of costs on the chalkboard or the blackboard, as we used to have it. It's probably some screen nowadays, and you just sort of point out that these are the costs, and it's not actually until you see them in right. I know you're smiling with my blackboard there. It's not until you see them in front of you actually begin to realize, my God, I didn't realize that's what's going out. And I think that's a good way to show youngsters, and anyone. It doesn't necessarily mean youngsters. Even grown-ups kind of don't realize it. It's only when difficult situations arise, they start to think, well, actually, I don't want to do this, and I shouldn't be paying for that, and I don't. Because it's easy to say it's only 20 quid, it's only £10, it's only £50, it's only. But at the end of the day, when it's going out, you start to realise that it's not just that. That's how you've got to see it.
Yeah, I have to say, I do remember you brought back a memory for me there. It was my mother that sat me down actually and told me how to keep a running total on my check stubs. Because obviously when you write a check in those days, it took some time before it was paid in and actually credited to your account, or debited from your account, right, should I say. So very often your balance was actually not what you thought it was, because things hadn't come off. And that simple cash flow training came from home, not from school. So there is an argument for sure for doing it in the home, perhaps. So we've mentioned on our second story this week, we've mentioned EPC certificates many times, Joe, as you'll know on the show. And landlords are facing a bit of a window, aren't they, of 2025, the latest, to make sure they've got their EPC certificates up to a C or above. And it's interesting, isn't it, that this was something that people were sort of kicking into the long grass. Oh, I'll sort that out later. But of course, with the cost of living crisis, what's happening is that the young renters in particular, the millennials, are saying, well, do you know what? I don't want to rent an expensive property to heat. So they're looking for energy efficient properties even now. And I suppose the big learn from all of this, 58% of private renters said they'd be less likely to look at a rental property if they were aware it had an EPC rating of D or below. So I guess the big message to landlords is maybe the EPC upgrades are going to be needed a lot sooner if you're going to avoid void periods.
Yes, I mean, interesting thing about this EPC is when it first came out some years back, it was just, I don't know, we all kind of rubbished it and said it's another stealth tax, it's another way of the government earning some money, it's another way of, and it's just another bit of paper that causes nothing, and no one really looks at it, and it's now become law, and that is something that I think we got to drum home. It's not something that you can run away from it. It's not going to go away. It's in fact become law to a point where in 2025, as you rightly say, any rental property certainly that is less than EPC C grade will become harder to rent, or perhaps not get the kind of rentals that they want, or perhaps the scenario is that they'll have the void period until they get it up to speed. Now, interestingly enough, only yesterday I was with an EPC guy, and he went to look at a property that we're selling, and it needed an update for the EPC. And the frightening part of it was, obviously he did his job, and it's great. The frightening part was how long it took to do it. It didn't take a long time. and what the tick boxes were that they had to do in their process of ticking the boxes to make sure that certain things were in things like double glazing, things like insulation in the roof space, things like what type of heating, whether it's central heating or gas or electric, and all those. It was pretty basic stuff to a large extent that was going to record the quality of the EPC. Now, what's happening at that is I will look into that a bit more, and obviously we'll share it on one of our other programs, and perhaps even get an EPC guy in to actually demonstrate to us, to our viewers and our listeners, exactly what it is that they've got to try and do to make sure that they score the appropriate EPC rating. But I think that what has come out of it is all new properties, all modern properties that are being built are obviously attaining that standard. It's the older properties that now need to get up to that level. And there comes a point, there's 2 points here that I need to make. One is that if it's vacant, it's easier to do. And if it isn't, it's equally harder to try and get things done for people that are in the property, because it's not just those insulations and double glazing parts that needs to be dealt with. It's also how somebody lives and what sort of drafts and what windows and so forth. And recently, we know that things like moisture and damp and all that kind of stuff has been on television about how people are. But part of it, it's about the people that are in those properties and how they actually live and use them. And that then falls on the landlord and not the person that is in there. And it's the irony of that is, for example, the biggest culprit is the bathroom and the shower room, or wherever they're going to have the shower. They've got to have some ventilation to let that steam out, but they don't. They tightened everything down, and the walls and ceilings are absolutely dripping in all the steam. That then becomes moisture and becomes damp and so forth. And actually, it's everybody else's fault but the person that actually had the shower and couldn't be bothered to open the windows because it's too cold. So you can't win all of these battles all by yourself. You need everyone to sort of join hands and participate, and that includes tenants as well as landlords. But yes, the EPC ratings to C are going to become law, and they're certainly going to be very stringent in 2025. So all landlords, when they get a chance of a property that has become vacant, need to use that time, utilize that time, get your builders and people in and get it rated. And I know people say, well, actually, I've had an EPC done. It was done 4 years ago. I don't need it done for another 5 years or whatever it is. I strongly recommend that in the grand scheme, it's probably better for you to have an updated EPC so that you are now rated at the right level as opposed to what was and to what is.
It's interesting that 72% of renters aged 18 to 34 say they always check the EPC rating before they make a decision about renting a property. And that compares to 52% for the over 55. So they're even more frugal. Perhaps they're even more cash strapped at that age potentially. But 72% of renters are aware of the EPC and are actually checking it before they move in. So there really is a call to landlords to get those older properties up to scratch. And I suppose that's inevitable with the way that the cost of living crisis is unfolding. And 1,000 people took part in the survey with Shawbrooks, and they wrote a report called Confronting the EPC Challenge. Just 7% of respondents felt they knew a lot about EPC requirements, while a quarter of tenants said that they'd heard of the EPC but didn't know much about it. A further 27% said they'd never heard of it, and half of renters admitted to not knowing the rating of their current property. So it seems this is being driven by the younger end of the market, doesn't it?
Well, primarily, Paul, that's because of technology, isn't it? It's easy to find these things. And every agent, letting agent, and of course, landlord, when letting them out, including selling them, need to attach or make available an EPC rating. Certainly, in terms of conveyancing, it has to be available at the time of documents being submitted to show that the EPC has been carried out. So yes, I think there's more education, more teaching required, more awareness needs to be built up on this EPC business, and obviously we'll do our part to try and do as much as we can on that. But I think landlords and sellers must be made aware that this is not going to go away. It is here to stay, and it's worth getting it done and checked. And if you're not sure, call an EPC guy in and get it rated. It's on the government website. That makes it even tougher and challenging, because every EPC that has been done is actually recorded. You can go on epc.gov or whatever it's called, and you'll find your house is up there when it was last done or it wasn't done, and what the last rating was on it, and if it's expired and so forth. I know all this because I've just done it. So I'm just telling you.
This is why we're here, to pass on
This
that
is why
news and that wisdom.
I've just done it, and I know it all exists, and I was quite astonished that all that information is available. So it is law. Take it read that we've told you so, and do take heed of what we're saying, basically.
It's a bit of a double whammy for landlords, isn't it? Because yet another cost that they've got to take on board, but also having left it to now, because it's been getting closer to 2024, 25, and the fact that now young renters are asking and demanding better economy in the property. But now, of course, reacting now and getting this stuff done now with the increasing cost of materials and the increasing cost of labour is going to be even more expensive for the landlord. So it's going to be a challenge for them.
Yes, and by having an EPC done, you're actually getting a bit of a direction as to what does need doing. So it's almost worth getting one of those done at the beginning of your works, and find out exactly what you need to do in order to get it to the level, because the same guy is going to have to come back and upgrade it to whatever you've now managed to secure it as. So rather than taking a gamble and saying, oh, it probably is this and probably that, you might find yourself in a better position, and perhaps a better budget in order to get the kind of works that you need to do to get it up the rating. And it's not just about the millennials and the younger people. The fact is that the rental market is going to be stronger probably for the next couple of years, whilst there's uncertainty in the mortgage processes and so forth, which I'm sure we'll cover shortly. But the point is that people are going to rent, and this is going to happen, and certainly the next 2 to 3 years. The rental market, in my opinion, will get stronger, though it's not that strong for the buy-to-let people, because the mortgage rates have become astronomical. But those that have bought and are in it for a long term need to make sure that the EPC standards are met.
So a little warning there to landlords to make sure they get those EPCs done as soon as possible, because you're going to have it done by 2025. Final story this week. Length of time is the top stress factor for home movers. Kind of knew that, didn't we? But this is an interesting survey from Smooth Home Mover Report. It says that the vast majority, 90% of people, said that they had found the process of moving home stressful, pointing to the length of time, the lack of certainty, and the wait for exchange and completion times. This is a survey of 1,000 people over the last 6 to 24 months that have moved. Found that 40% said that those surveyed found length of time taking to be completely frustrating. Around a third said that the lack of certainty and the wait for exchange and completion to be finalised was the main source of anxiety. The report said that the average amount of time between instruction and completion was 5 months, or 153 days, and over a third of property transactions had fallen through in the year to July 2022. Something we talk about a lot, isn't it? The conveyancing process. It really is broken, isn't it?
God, you know how to push my buttons, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just an old adage story, really, isn't it? I mean, it just can't change. Stress factors are high when moving home at the best. When I was growing up, now that I'm a bit older, I can say that. We were always told that there are sort of top 3 or 4 factors that are most stressful: divorce, death, and moving home was probably right up there. And it's not really come off that top scale, really. That's a lot of years it's been doing the same thing. It's actually, if you had a league of stress factors, then somehow moving home has managed to sustain its the stability in the top 3, and now obviously rating are high for people moving home. It's caused by a number of things, but the biggest one is the process it takes And it's not just for homeowners and home buyers. It's equally for people like us, agents and commercially minded people. It's just the process is so tedious, and there's only one person that happens to have all of the answers to that. Unfortunately, it's your conveyancer or your lawyer who's actually doing it, because ultimately they are the ones that are handling all the transaction, and it just seems to drag on for one reason or another. And I can say that, and I'm quite happy to say that quite clearly, they can stretch it out over one word for 3 months. I promise you, they can. And it's ludicrous to think that they won't pick up the phone. Everything's got to be in writing. Everything's in emails, and everything has a process, and it's stressful. People want to know when their completion dates are. They've got their mortgage offer. They've done their searches. They're ready to go, and something is not being answered. So it is said that things should be done online. I'm not particularly confident with that. I have to be honest with you. I don't think everything can be done online. There are some aspects. Moving home, I have to say, is one of the largest amount of money you will mentally, not physically, but mentally spend in your lifetime. If you're going to go and buy a £250,000 or £200,000 property, or £1 million or 10 million, this is the largest amount of money you will ever spend in your mindset, and it's drags and drags and frustrates, and you don't need an online process to be able to tell you can or can't do this. You want to be able to confide. You want to be able to go and speak to somebody. You want to get that comfort of knowing that you're doing the right thing, and all the documents are right and it's checked out and so forth. And when you get online, Paul, what happens is you can't find someone to talk about the questions that you might raise, and that could be, now these chat rooms come on, and that's just somebody else who's got to pass it on to someone else, and yeah, it's like that really. It just doesn't go away. It just goes on and on and on and on. And the reality is that there has to be a system devised where somebody can actually be spoken to. I mean, going back 40 plus years, solicitors would call in the client prior to exchanging contracts, to go through the contract, to go through the documents, to make sure that they were happy. I know it sounds archaic, but it was pretty good. And people felt really good about the idea of saying, you know what, I've actually gone to see my solicitor. I've understood the documents. He's explained to me what I'm getting into, and so forth. And now what we do is we get this online version of yeah, and put your question in the chat room, and we'll see if we can answer it for you. And it's just not personable enough for people to understand that they're making this massive decision. So I'm not convinced that the online process that people continue to suggest is done. But a lot of the back end can be done online. Things that, like the searches and the environmental replies and all that sort of stuff, can be done. But I think people want to feel that they are actually getting so much value for money, but more service, more realism about the biggest purchase that they're ever going to make in their lifetime. So the conveyancing system is definitely broke. It wasn't, I believe, but it definitely is now. And I don't see it getting repaired unless something dramatic happens.
Almost 2/3 of the movers said that they'd found the process more expensive than they'd expected. Aside from the deposit, the stamp duty and estate agency fees, the biggest costs cited were, fun enough, solicitors' fees, followed by the cost of buying new furniture. Nearly a third said that the mortgage product fees were one of the biggest costs they faced.
Yes, I mean, there are certain costs that you can't get away from. Obviously, solicitors' costs are one of those as a buyer. When you take out a mortgage, you are going to have survey fees, and you're going to have arrangement fees and so forth. That will be probably survey fees you have to pay. Other things can be added to your loan. Then you've got your solicitors' costs. The things you can't get away from is the stamp duty. That's a government tax that's not going to go away. Solicitors' costs, obviously, someone's got to be paid to do the job. They are rising primarily because of everything else is rising. So, everyone's going to have it's like everybody else that being on strike. The next thing you'll find is the solicitors might be on strike. And so constantly there are going to be costs, but there comes a point as to like, where is all of that going to get paid from? And that's probably the frustration part. But I think people get involved in property, as I said a number of times before, primarily because it is our mindset. We want to own our own home. And even though maybe the lender owns 90% of it and you only put 10% of it, it's still better than probably renting and paying someone else's mortgage, as somebody keeps saying to me, I'd rather be not paying someone else's mortgage, I'd rather be paying my own mortgage. So that is a huge advantage. Of course, whilst they spent all this money in getting it all set up and so forth, what they also realize is that long term, there's a capital appreciation in the property. And that's what they really go for, in all honesty, Paul. The pain that we go through is for the gain at the end. And the gain is that house prices continues to go up. When I look back, 40 plus years ago, as I always say, my first house I sold was for 34,950. The same house today is probably worth about £650,000. And that's, if somebody had invested, if we all had the crystal ball and bought, 40 odd years ago at the time, look where it would be. So you can never say to people, don't buy, because I think that's one of the best things you can do. But yes, there's a whole route in order to buy, to go through that process. And part of that route is ticking the right things. And the first and foremost is making sure that your own credit is absolutely right, because that's going to make a lot of decisions whether you are even going to be in the frame of getting a mortgage, let alone what amount you're going to get.
A lot of people, 2/3 of the people said they used savings, or over a third relied on equity from selling their current property to finance all these bills. And approximately a fifth said they used the bank of mum and dad, of course. And the stress of home moving means that over half of them were unlikely to move again in the next 5 years. And the suggestion is that because the process is so broken, that actually it's discouraging people from entering the property market sooner, to move on again, and many are staying in what they would now frame as an unsuitable home. And they're saying that, excuse me, they're saying that if they can digitise the online process or the transaction process with digital IDs and signatures and form filling and digitising parts of the conveyancing process, that would actually help to bring people back into the moving process more frequently, because it would be less stressful and a lot quicker.
I don't think that will actually happen. I think it's a good chat for whoever's written that point. Moving home has never been much more than 3 to 5 years. It's been 5 years forever, as long as I can think back. I think by the time you've actually bought a property, settled down, unless something dramatic or drastic has happened in your life, loss of a partner, separation, all the other things, all of the above that makes you want to move or sell earlier, then nobody is going to be moving for 5 to 7 years, to be honest with you. So I think that's a bit of baloney, really, about if the system will make it any easier. The system won't make it any easier. What the system will do is maybe make the process in the background and make it a bit more personable if they utilised it. Now, it already exists, but nobody utilises it. And that's the problem. I mean, I'm in the business, so we speak to solicitors all the time, and we do them. And it's quite shocking, Paul, quite shocking to think that there are things that can be done in 2 days that don't get done in 3 months, and it's frightening. And I've actually had those things happen, where somebody is actually, instructed, bought, got the paperwork, got everything that they needed to be done in a couple of maybe 3 days, done and dusted. And that process can take 3 to 5 months, as people are saying here. And that's because of the volume of work that maybe somebody takes on, and it just becomes a bit of a sausage factory. You sort of throw so much into it and so much comes out of it. But I suppose it's what you pay for. But you don't have to pay a king's ransom for it. It is something that is doable. And I think that most people tend to look at these things and say, okay, well, how am I going to do this? And it's who you choose and how it works. And if you go to a factory firm of lawyers, then you are going to be stuck in the system for a while. equally, if you go to a traditional lawyer that you think is your family lawyer and friend, that's equally just as bad, because they think you're your family lawyer and friend. They always think, oh, it's okay, it's only Paul. I'll deal with that tomorrow, and tomorrow kind of never comes. So you've got to find that happy medium as to who you're going to work with and what we're going to do. But it is a stressful thing. It is a costly thing. But at the end of the day, there is a gain after all that pain.
Lovely. Well, that's where we have to leave it for this week, Joe. I'm sure as the weeks unfold and 2023 unfolds, there'll be plenty of other talking points for us to discuss on Property Matters. We'll see you again next time, next Sunday at 10 o'clock.